This is a video that I've been putting off for too long. Dororo is an anime that came out in 2019 and it was received pretty well. I've only recently watched it and I quite enjoyed it myself, but what I didn't know when watching it is that it had another anime adaptation made way back in 1969 by the name of Dororo to Hyakimaru. Naturally, that piqued my interest and I decided to give it a watch, and surprisingly, I actually like the new version of Dororo more. That may come as a shock from the guy who likes the old versions of FMA and Shaman King more than the new one, but it's less shocking when you actually compare the new adaptation of Dororo to the manga that it's based off of. From what I can tell, the 2019 adaptation of Dororo actually made more changes to the source material than the original did. I was pretty surprised to learn that, especially since so many people seem to enjoy this anime. It may be a case of not many people actually being familiar with the source material, but it's still cool to see that people appreciated this different take on an old story. Anyways, that's enough for an intro, so let's just get into this comparison between these two series. Disclaimer, there will be spoilers for Dororo, both the new and old one, in case you want to check out the old one. The first episode of Dororo really surprised me, since it was really solid and it set up the plot and setting pretty darn well. Nothing really felt lacking, as is the case with some shows that have multiple adaptations. The first episode was really well paced, and it didn't feel overly slow or too fast. I also gotta give massive props to Studio Mappa. Dororo is an incredibly good looking show. It has consistently beautiful art direction and animation across all of its 24 episodes. As I said, the first episode is a really good introduction to the story of Dororo. A lord offers his son as a sacrifice to demons in exchange for, okay, wow, we're already at one of the biggest and arguably most important changes that the anime made to the story. Lord Daigo was originally a selfish man, bartering his son's limbs in exchange for power, or something along those lines. It's kind of vague. However, in the new anime, Daigo as well as his people live in less than satisfying conditions. They have bad crops, constant flooding, and all around they just have the worst land ever. So in order to fix this, Daigo decides to sacrifice his would-be heir in order for people to prosper and live in peace. It gives a lot more nuance to the man who was originally just your standard power-hungry bad guy. So after Daigo makes the trade with the demons, the main character Hyakimaru by some miracle manages to survive. He replaces all of his missing body parts with artificial ones, and he goes on a quest to slay all of the demons to get his body back. When we're first introduced to Hyakimaru at the beginning, we encounter our second major change to the original manga, and I'd argue that this was probably the best change made. In this version of our story, our main protagonist does not have the ability to speak, hear, or even really see. Now you may think that that's an obvious result of losing all of your limbs, including your eyes, mouth, and ears, but in the original Dororo, Hyakimaru is basically able to do everything that a normal person would. I feel like this single change made for a much more compelling and interesting story than the one that this anime was based off of. It transformed this very simple action-adventure story into this unique character study of this person literally trying to regain his humanity. The new adaptation places a lot more focus on the importance of Hyakimaru's body. Whenever he gets a body part back as a result of defeating a demon, the audience gets to see how it affects the main character. When he gets his leg back, he limps for a while before getting used to it again. Once he recovers his sense of pain, we see his curiosity in this new feeling that he's never experienced before. By far the most powerful moments from the new version of Dororo come from these quiet scenes, where we see the protagonist silently familiarizing himself with the senses that should be normal to him but aren't because of his circumstances. Like this part, when Hyakimaru gets his hearing back after killing this bloodthirsty possessed sword. After all the tense and loud action, we get this cool slow zoom out as we just hear the rain pouring down in the background. In this moment, we truly understand what our hero is feeling, because right now, for both Hyakimaru and us, the rain is the loudest thing in the world. This incredible scene only lasts for a short amount of time, yet it says so much without needing any words. It's handled with such beauty and skill, and even though it's a small scene, it's easily one of my favorites. Now, I also need to criticize the show for something that's actually related to this very scene. The episode after this starts off with Hyakimaru still not used to his ears, and it's a powerful moment where we get to see him still trying to get used to it, until the narrator starts talking. This fucking guy comes in and just explains everything that makes the scene layered and nuanced, and by doing so, he makes this moment far less stimulating and engaging. It takes this very subtle and quiet moment and turns it into this dumb talk show with celebrity guest Hyakimaru. I don't think the narrator completely takes away from this beautiful scene that I talked about earlier, but it gets in the way enough for me to say, yeah, I get it. Anyways, comparing this to the old adaptation, whenever Hyakimaru got a limb back, he just kind of says, "Isn't this great?" and then continues on with his day. Now, the original Hyakimaru gets more interesting development later on, but it's only loosely tied to his quest to get his body back. And speaking speaking of the old adaptation, I don't think that it doesn't have anything worth watching. It is very old, but even compared to the 2019 adaptation, there are some things it does genuinely better. For one, the way the original adaptation is structured makes for more fleshed out episodic stories. Dororo's backstory is one example that I can think of off the top of my head. The original dedicated more time to exploring Dororo's past and her relationship with her parents, specifically her mom. While I think the new adaptation handles this material well enough, there are parts where I can clearly see the missing story beats leading to certain events. For example, the part where Dororo's father is betrayed by Itachi. In the new adaptation, Dororo's father is going into battle with some samurai and he happens to get shot in the leg because he let his guard down due to false information. While this does make sense, that's all it is, a loose sequence of events that isn't tied together super well. In comparison, the original dedicates 2 episodes to Dororo's past, making for more time to tell a coherent story that does more than just make sense. In the old version, Itachi and some of his friends kidnap Dororo and drop her off at the magistrate's office. They intentionally leave a note telling Dororo's parents where they left her, leading to Dororo's parents going after them and being forced to turn themselves in. Then, after managing to escape, Dororo's family tries to make it back to their base, at which point Itachi intercepts them as a means of making sure that Dororo's father wouldn't make it out unscathed, at which point Itachi shoots Dororo's father in the legs, crippling him, not killing him because they used to be friends. The old adaptation forms a tighter narrative for each story used in the anime. However, the new adaptation of Dororo has a stronger overarching story, placing Hyakimaru's desire for his body at the center of it. Admittedly, the new adaptation of Dororo does rush through some material, as I've already mentioned with Dororo's past, but it's a lot more bearable here because 1, it's never to the point where the anime feels botched or terrible, and 2, they actually use the extra time they have in order to tell an entirely different story, showing scenes of Hyakimaru, as I said, getting used to his new leg, or arm, or voice. Speaking of voice, let's talk about the time when Hyakimaru got back his voice. It involves a story about a girl named Mio, who is another character whose impact on the story drastically changes in the new adaptation. In both the old and new adaptation of Dororo, Hyakimaru meets a woman named Mio, and they fall in love with each other, and I know that I just said the old adaptation handles all of its side stories better than the new one, however, this particular story about Mio actually has a lot more nuance to it than the original iteration. In the original, Hyakimaru tells Dororo about his past and he talks about Mio, a woman he fell in love with, and the main problem with this in the original was the fact that Mio was an object. Her only purpose is to be used as a way of giving the main character a semi-sad backstory. It doesn't help that in the flashback of her, Mio doesn't really talk or do anything that could establish a personality or even a relationship between her and the main character. The only reason why we get the sense that she's important to Hyakimaru is because he tells us she is. However, in the new adaptation, she's much more fleshed out. She's no longer just a stat on Hyakimaru's training card, because she instead serves as a point of development for the new version of Hyakimaru. Actually, that seems to be a running theme with the side characters of the new adaptation. Every supporting character such as Jukai, Daigo, Tahomaru, Basan, Oku, Itachi, and the aforementioned Mio are given more narrative purpose than just being a part of Hyakimaru or Dororo's backstory. I mentioned Daigo's change motivations for doing the shit he's done. Tahomaru, Hyakimaru's younger brother, changes from a minor inconvenience into an actual narrative force, pushing the main character to his limits multiple times, and he even gets his own character arc. Basan in the original was a mysterious monk who just happened to bump into Hyakimaru and train him to become a competent fighter, and he only appears in 2 episodes. In the new version, however, Basan turns into a recurring character who travels around the world and occasionally lends a helping hand to the main duo. Hyakimaru's mother's only narrative purpose in the original is to be killed off at the end to make the story sadder. However, in the new version, we constantly get inside her head. We get to see her point of view on all of this. We see her drowning in regret and resentment towards herself for not saving Hyakimaru before, and she also serves as another stepping stone on Hyakimaru's road to development. Itachi only shows up in Dororo's flashback in the original, but in the new version, he comes back later to find the treasure that Dororo's father hid, which gets brought up near the ending. And then there's Jukai. In the original, he served as another object. He was nothing more than a certified father figure for Hyakimaru. We didn't get to see much of him, but he seemed to be a respectable person, taking care of Hyakimaru pretty much out of the goodness of his heart. But in the new version, Jukai actually used to be a servant of Lord Daigo, and because of that he was forced to do certain things that aren't very good. It was so bad that he couldn't live with the guilt and tried to end it all. He survived, however, and decided he would spend the rest of his life atoning for all he had done. In the new version, Jukai is a much more layered person with a lot more to him. He took in Hyakimaru as a way of atoning for his sins, and ended up genuinely caring for the kid. The original Jukai also cared deeply for Hyakimaru, but we don't get to see much of their bond. In the new version, we do, which makes for a much more emotional end to this flashback. When Hyakimaru leaves to go on his journey in the original story, it feels ham-fisted because we're only told that Hyakimaru saw Jukai as a father by Hyakimaru himself as he recounts the tale. But in the new version, we don't need Hyakimaru to tell us because we can pick up on that feeling along the way. And finally, Mio. In the new version, we get to see Mio right after Hyakimaru gets his hearing back, and Hyakimaru grows rather fond of her because her voice is the only thing that doesn't hurt his sensitive hearing. In the new version, we get to know her. We don't have someone just tell us who she is, we actually get to see who she is. We also get to see why Mio likes Hyakimaru. In this version, the process of them falling in love is natural and it happens right in front of us, and it feels a lot more impactful than it did in the original when a certain something happens. It's at this point in time that another change is added to the new adaptation. One of the central questions that is raised after this event is whether or not Hyakimaru will become a demon once he gets all of his body parts back. In the original version, this idea was brought up pretty briefly in episode 16, but the show never really does anything with that. In both the original and new adaptation, Hyakimaru becomes obsessed with killing demons and getting his body back. But the new adaptation uses the idea that was present in the original and expands upon it a lot more. And while I think that the change was very admirable, I also have to bring up one of my main criticisms with the new Dororo. While this question is inherently interesting, the way it's executed in the new version of Dororo always felt superficial to me. By that I mean, I never really understood why Basan, the person who raised this question in the first place, was worried about this. Throughout the entire story, we only see Hyakimaru kill evil demons to take back something that was his in the first place, and while he does dirty his hands by killing other people, the only people we really see him kill are literally child murderers, or people who try to kill him first. Throughout the entire anime, there was never a time where I saw Hyakimaru as evil, or even going too far to achieve his goals. It always felt as though the story was trying to force that onto his character, and it came off as a cheap source of tension for the later half of the story. And I understand that in this version, Hyakimaru getting his body back by slaying demons is harming the livelihoods of many, many people. But Hyakimaru never consented to giving his body up for the sake of everyone else. In fact, he never got the chance to, which makes me feel like there's nothing wrong with Hyakimaru trying to get his body back. While the villain of this story has more sympathetic and understandable reasons for selling Hyakimaru's body, he's still the villain. He's still ultimately in the wrong for doing something so utterly heinous and repulsive. If Daigo was really the good guy here, he would have let the demons feast on his body and not opt to let someone else be the team player in his place. I don't know, it just seems kinda backwards when the anime frames the main character as the potentially flawed one and not the guy who literally sold his own child to be eaten by a bunch of demons. I mean, seriously, these assholes literally slaughtered children not 2 minutes ago, and the guy attacking them looks bad? Moving on from that, I've noticed that a lot of the side stories in the new Dororo have the same formula as each other. Hyakimaru and Dororo stumble into town, they discover that a demon has been causing trouble for the people there, and they find out that the townspeople are complying with the demon, sacrificing their people, or travelers, to be eaten by the demon in exchange for food, wealth, or just their survival. While I didn't find the whole ambiguous moral compass of our hero subplot to be particularly interesting or engaging, I did enjoy these self-contained stories that the new adaptation added in, specifically the aftermath of these episodes. The fact that Hyakimaru is depriving these towns of their security and well-being by slaying the demons occupying them shows how much getting back his entire body would affect Daigo's land. These episodes serve as a reminder of the people that Hyakimaru will have to cut down in order to accomplish his goal, and the parts where Hyakimaru doesn't show any remorse for these people are what brought me closest to thinking, what a douche. You know who else is a douche actually? The original version of Dororo. The character, not the anime. Seriously, this is the first time I've ever wanted to hit someone so badly. Dororo from the 1969 adaptation is incredibly annoying. Why? Because in almost every episode, she finds a way to fuck everything up. Her excessive desire to steal shit is always getting her into trouble, and I get it, she's a little kid, she's kind of supposed to be annoying, but no kid screws up as much as she does. You'd think for a kid who's a lot more mature than most because of the setting she grew up in, she would have enough common sense to know when she's doing something that could possibly lead her to getting eaten by demons. Seriously, how many times has this kid seen an otherworldly monster almost kill someone? It happens in literally every episode. Why can't she just recognize that and listen to Hyakimaru for once in the anime? I hate it when writers rely on their characters to act stupidly in order to add a sense of tension or drama into the story. I know that everyone makes fun of the fact that people in scary movies have to be really dim to get into the situations that they do, but this is unironically the worst way to add tension into a story. In anime, anime doesn't have to be entirely realistic, that would be incredibly monotonous, but a writer has to at least make character actions relatable, or at least understandable, to keep a sense of realism in the story. So when I see a story intentionally make its characters as dumb as possible, I always roll my eyes because of how freaking terrible it turns out to be. Dororo from the 2019 adaptation was never as annoying as the original version, at least on a surface level. No, the new character of Dororo has a much more subtle way of ticking people off. To show you how she does it, I'm going to play 3 clips from Dororo 2019 and see if you can spot the similarities between these clips. That's right! Most of the time, Dororo's only narrative purpose is to be kidnapped and separated from Hyakimaru. I mean, seriously, it happens so damn much. In the original, while Dororo was incredibly annoying, she at least did do something to help. Whenever she messed up, she would at least contribute to help fix her mistakes. But in the new version, Dororo doesn't get the chance to help Hyakimaru at all. She would at best give moral support to Hyakimaru, while at worst put him in a compromising situation. Seriously, might as well rename her Mokuba because she loves getting kidnapped. While I do prefer the new version of Dororo because she's a lot less obvious about how she annoys you, I don't find either version to be particularly better. Even in terms of little things that could give one an edge over the other, like voice acting, there's not really a clear winner. The original Dororo's voice was incredibly grating and annoying, but I can't deny that it really fit the character. Plus, overall, the original voice actor showed a lot more emotion than the new one does. The new voice, while nice to listen to, feels very restrained. Like the voice actor has trouble expressing certain emotions like anger or something that requires yelling. So it's a choice between grating, and I mean a really grating voice, but a good performance, and a nice sounding voice but a lackluster one. And you know what, while we're on the subject, let's talk about production. I touched upon this briefly in the beginning of my video, but my god is the new Dororo an amazing show to look at. It's absolutely beautiful, and I love the way the show portrays the world using its very effective color palette. Its animation is fluid and jaw-droppingly gorgeous sometimes, as is the case with its beautiful first LP, but then again, what was I expecting from the studio that gave us JJK and AOT's final season? By comparison, the original version is purely monochromatic, and that's to be expected looking at when it came out. Generally speaking, I'd say that it still looks pretty good, but it is sometimes held back by how old it is, which is something that I really hate to say, but I'd be lying if I said that it didn't affect my viewing experience. Oh god, no, stop, no! There are some shots in here that, quite frankly, look terrible. Like this one shot of Daigo in the beginning, just look at the way his eye moves here. It's unintentionally hilarious, and if you want to make the guy look threatening, well, I don't know. The way that music is utilized in the show is strange too, and by that I mean there'll be a part where music is playing over it, and then the music will just randomly cut out at times, indicating a shift in tone. But the way it's done makes it really abrupt, and it just completely knocks the wind out of me whenever it happens. Like, look at this part. I'm sorry, it's just that going from this very whimsical and slightly annoying sound to this silent shot that's supposed to be serious and sad, it's just really out of nowhere and surprising in a bad way, and it's a lot more distracting than you would think from just hearing it. But this is a story with a lot of dark elements. If the demons that fucking eat people weren't any indication, well, I don't know what is. There's also a war going on or something, which I guess is bad. Now that I've mentioned it, in both versions of the story there's this war going on, but don't ask for any specifics because neither anime really gives you any information to work with. It's all really vague, and you're never given any context to why this war is happening, which is why it's not that important of a discussion point. While watching both versions of Dororo, I never found any incentive to care about the war that was going on. I was just like, okay, Hyakimaru and Dororo are on a journey together, and there's a war going on, but I don't need to keep that in mind that much. It's all really about what Hyakimaru Hyakimaru is doing right now, which brings me to the main character. I actually love both versions of Hyakimaru quite a lot. The original Hyakimaru is a pretty standard badass character, but he's a lot more interesting than I thought he would be at first. I found his hesitance to accept that he had parents to be interesting, since if he really did have parents, he couldn't believe that they would feed him to demons. Besides that, he comes off as a lot more clever than you would think. When in battle, he comes up with pretty smart ways to take out his enemies, but he also uses his intelligence to be a little more mischievous than you would expect from him. The new version of Hyakimaru is way different, however. While he doesn't technically have a personality, his character does a lot of things. His obsession with getting his body back really puts a unique spin on the aforementioned badass character trope. He isn't just this awesome hero who doesn't fear anything, he only keeps fighting because he doesn't know what fear is, and he's driven to hunt demons down solely due to his own desires, and his curiosity and the senses that he gets back from killing demons is great characterization. He kind of feels like a kid who's playing with a new toy, which makes sense because he's not used to feeling, smelling, talking, hearing, or even seeing. And although I love them both, the new version of Hyakimaru has to be the winner here. The 2019 adaptation of Dororo is carried by Hyakimaru and his incredible character. Hyakimaru is the perfect protagonist for a show like this. The only reason why a lot of the elements of the story work is because of Hyakimaru. Plus, his character is just a heck of a lot more nuanced and interesting than his 1969 counterpart. So yeah, I've talked about everything that's worth noting. In my opinion, the original version of Dororo holds up surprisingly well against the 2019 version. However, the 2019 version is the indisputable winner in my eyes due to its more gripping story, amazing production value, as well as its bold yet for the most part great changes to the source material. I can always appreciate it when an adaptation puts its own spin on an established story, doubly so when it's actually good, like with Dororo. That's all I wanted to say, and I'll be going now.